Hey there, boys and girls. Today I want to talk about snare drums. I want to talk about how to get that fat and punchy, beefy, rock and metal snare drum sound. And that's why I'm here. This is my live room, the Room of Boom, where I record drums. So this will be a quick and dirty tutorial, a crash course, how to get a snare sound like this. So the first question is, what kind of snare sound do we actually want? And I like if it's fat and punchy. That is what I call the traditional rock snare sound. Even the modern metal productions, they all have a very, very low-tuned, fat-sounding snare. So it's a combination of having a low-tuned snare with a lot of studio processing that, like pushing the high frequencies, pushing the attack with compression, giving that snare both body, but also attack and smack. That combination is just beautiful. I know there are other tastes out there. I know there are some people who like super high-pitched snares. I know there's something called slam death metal where you have to do this, and no problem at all. But today I want to talk about beefy snare drums, punchy, fat snare drums. If you don't like that, just watch another video. As you might know, a good snare sound and a good sound overall mostly starts with the source. That's what I'm trying to preach here, Instead of over-processing things, instead of repairing things later in the studio, just get it right from the start. Same with guitar tones, just find a good combination of speakers and microphones, and instead of using a million bands of EQs later. You will need some processing on snare drums. Of course you will need that. But, we should try to get where we want to go directly from the start. And that means if we want a low-tuned and fat snare sound, we need to record a fat-sounding snare drum, right? So what I'm using, these are my recommendations. What I'm using is snares that are big, fat snare drums. So I don't want to use 12-inch and 13-inch snare drums. No, I use snare drums 14-inch by 6.5-inch or even bigger. So the snare drum we are using today is this one. Pretty heavy motherfucker. This is I can call it a vintage snare. This is a snare from the 90s. It's a pearl free-floating brass snare, 6.5-inch deep. All my snares are 6.5 or even deeper. We got another one here that we will also hear today. This is also a pearl snare, aluminum snare, way lighter, same size. But I also have a Yamaha 14x7 snare, which sounds great. I have that Vinnie Paul 14x8 snare, which sounds okay. And we've got quite a few more snares here. You can get away with a 14x5.5 or what it is, but the cool thing about having a deeper snare is that you can actually tune it way higher and you still got some low end and some beef compared to smaller snare drums. And the cool thing is you can usually go lower if you have to. So, if you want a fat sound, get a fat snare drum. That's the first thing. One other thing I recommend is not to dampen it too much, because everything you get rid of right from the start, you cannot bring back. And very, very often, all the guitars, the distorted guitars in a metal mix, they eat up all the sustain of a snare. So if you start with a snare that has a certain sustain, a lot of it will disappear in the mix anyway. But if you start with a very short sounding snare, you're going to end up with nothing. So what I do is I mostly just use undampened snare heads, Ambassador snare heads. What do we have here? Yes. Ambassador, single ply. And if you really need to dampen it, you can use, moon jails if you have to. I think you can also use this as a sex toy. I haven't tried, but I'm sure it's possible. Yeah, so don't over dampen the snare. That's what I usually do. You're more flexible with using moon jails. So that's the second tip I have for you. The third one is, well, I prefer metal snares to wood snares. But again, the size of the snare and the head you use and the tuning are way more important than the material. It's just, I haven't, this is not science, you know, but in my experience, most of the metal snares have sounded better. And I own more metal snares than wood snares. On the other hand, the difference between metal and metal, you know, is also huge. So, it's more about finding the right snare drum. The most important things I've just told you are the size, the tuning, and the head, and the dampening. And finding the right snare for the sound you want is nothing I can really tell you in a YouTube video. What I recommend is go to a store, go somewhere, and find the most resonant sounding snare drum, the one that fills the room the most, the one with the most, that covers the most frequencies. You will hear the difference. There are some snares that just sound a little choked and a little small, others just have more to offer. So let's compare those two snares that you've just seen. They have the same size, they have the same head, they have no dampening at all. So it's just more or less, you know, the material that makes the difference. And they sound different, of course. They both sound cool. So the tuning is the same, 275 Hertz, kind of high for my taste. The better head, and the resonant head is at 300 Hertz. I'll turn off the room mics now so you can really hear the difference of those two snares. Here we go. So that sounds quite different. First of all, the aluminum snare sounds deeper. That is interesting. Same tuning. By the way, for tuning, you should use something like this. This is the TuneBot, and that is a little helper that is really cool to fine-tune snare drums or toms, but also to recall your settings. I'll put a link down there. This is so helpful. Get a TuneBot, please. I can't live without it anymore. So, despite having the same tuning, the aluminum snare sounds deeper. Interesting. Even more interesting is the attack. Most people listen to the sustain of the snare. I told you it's gonna disappear later anyway. You have to listen to the attack. And the attack of the aluminum snare sounds fuller and fatter and maybe a little more woody. And the attack of the brass snare, of the free floating, sounds a little more snarey, a little more metal, a little more aggressive, kind of, but also a little thinner. So just to make you understand this, I've added a transient designer to every track and removed all the sustain. So now you can concentrate on the attack of the snare. Let's have another listen to those two snares, concentrate on the attack and see if you can hear what I'm talking about. Now you can hear it, right? And that's what you should concentrate on. The attack of the snare is what's gonna define the sound in the end in a metal mix. The sustain's gonna disappear more or less. So listen and concentrate on the attack. That will define the character of your snare sound on your recording. So you've seen this nice drummer, that is Thomas Kurek. He's from Darmstadt, local drummer. First time I had him here, cool guy, nice drummer, cool drummer, and he plays in a local band called WIGHT. They're playing some kind of psychedelic rock or something, stoner rock, really cool band. I'll put a link down there to one of their videos, check them out. So I asked him to come here and to play drums, to play the same groove all the time, and so we can check out some different tunings. I want to show you the range that I use. You might be doing something else, but the range that I use for tuning. That range, if you have a 14 by 6.5 or bigger snare drum, is, for the better head, is between, let's say, 230, which is very, very low, and maximum 300. But 300 only if the drummer forces me to do that, because he needs a lot of rebound for his blast beats. Usually I try to be between 235, 240 and, let's say, 275. Okay, that's already quite high. So let me show you a few tunings. There is no processing at all on the drums. No EQs, no compressor, nothing, okay? This is just the raw material, how we recorded it. Later we will process it a little, but this is the raw material. Yeah, let's check out the first tuning, which is the Kohle high tuning. Yeah, don't get me wrong, that sounds cool, right? That sounds cool. It sounds like, for me, it sounds like a Red Hot Chili Peppers kind of snare sound or something. But that's not really what I want for metal. I want more oomph. That's what we're looking for today, right? And I want to show you that you have to go pretty low. Most drummers tune their snares way too high, you know. If you have your head here above the snare and you tune it very high, bop, bop, it feels very powerful, but it mostly sounds like a joke if you let drummers tune their snares themselves. I'm sorry to say that. Whatever, that was my high tuning. Sounds great, but not metal enough. So let's go lower. Let's go to 250, from 275 to 250. We leave the resonant head untouched. Let's go. And this is what I call a great middle-of-the-road tuning. So the snare is still pretty responsive, and it still sounds kind of what I call snarey. It has a nice ring. It doesn't sound out of control, but it also has enough boom, enough low end, enough punch. That's 250. Keep that in mind. Very good tuning. But of course, I want to go lower. You know, I want to sound really fucking evil like all those modern productions. And for that kind of snare sound, you really have to go lower. So let's go to 235 and let's see what happens. Here we go. And here we can see, you know, there's a lot more punch there. You know, there's a lot more low end, there's a lot more punch. So if you concentrate on the attack again and not on the sustain, this sounds very heavy metal. But the snare already sounds kind of out of control. It's not in its sweet spot anymore. But I want that. I want that low end. What can we do? And here we need to start talking about the resonant head, because the resonant head has a different function. So if you want to play safe, what you should do is you just crank the resonant head and just tune the snare with the better head. And that works pretty well. But you have to understand that the resonant head is both controlling also the overall height of the snare, of the tone of the snare, but it's also controlling how controlled a snare drum sounds. So whenever I reach a point where I feel like, wow, I want to be this deep and this low with a snare drum, but the snare drum kind of, you know, feels out of control, I will crank the resonant head a little more. So let's try that here. And we will go from 300 down there up to 325. And the better head stays at, 235. Here we go. It sounds a little higher, but it sounds a lot more under control. And now you can see how those two heads kind of play together. That's interesting. One thing I do recommend for tuning, I always have my resonant head higher than the better head. Otherwise, it just sounds weird to me. I don't know why, maybe you know, but I don't like it. It sounds out of control, it sounds weak, it sounds loose, it sounds, I don't know, kind of lazy as well. So I prefer to crank the resonant head a little more than the upper head, or even a lot more. Depends on. The more you do it, the more controlled it would sound. But at some point, it gets a little too thin. But this was a good combination. So let's check out all the tunings we had. And this is, yeah, like we're marching through the area, like the range that I use when I record. We start at 275, we go to 250, we go down to 235, and then we stay at 35, but we crank the resonant head. And then we will go back to the first tuning so you hear how thin it actually sounds. Here we go. I think I found my tuning for a fat and beefy metal rock snare sound. It's the last one we used. So the batter head is at 235 and the resonant head is at 300, what is it, 25 or 30 or something. So way higher. Good combination. But of course we need some processing to make this snare sound in a mix. But you know what? If you want that sound, it's way easier to record a fat sounding low tuned snare and add some attack, add some bite later in the studio than doing the opposite thing. If you tune a snare too high, it's a lot more difficult to add some fat low end, some beef to that snare. That is very difficult, believe me. And I know drummers like playing high tuned, high pitched snares, but it's a pain in the ass in the studio. Tell them it's way better to do it the other way around. If that's the sound you want, if you want a high-pitched snare, I don't care. So let's add some processing. What you need is, you need some compression to get more smack, you need some EQ to get more high-end and higher mid-bite, that's what you want, and you want to remove some boxy, around 500 hertz, some boxy frequencies. And if there's still too much ring, you might also want to remove that. So let's just do that. I'm not going to go into details, maybe in another video about this. And let's have a listen to my final snare drum sound. It's that tuning that I just described, but with more processing to make that snare, you know, in your face sounding and to give it more bite. Here we go. Alright everybody, I think I'm gonna get a lot of hate comments now from people who tune their snare completely differently, but you know, stay polite everybody and yeah, leave a comment. I like discussions, that is fair enough, that is cool. So let's see, maybe I'm gonna do a few more videos about drums. The reason why Thomas came here was actually because we were filming a complete course, like a beginner's course for recording drums. So I thought like, hey, let's also turn this into a little YouTube video. The course is for my upcoming academy, the Kohle Audio Cult. And I don't know, we're getting closer and closer to the start of it. And I'm hoping you will be a part of it, that academy. And yeah, what else? I want you to subscribe to this channel, of course, and to ring the bell, ding dong. Subscribe to my email list. I think it's about time that I send you some stuff again, right? I haven't done that for a while. I promise, next video I will send you some stuff, some drums samples or some IRs or whatever. I'll find something. Yeah, subscribe to my email list. There's a link below. And I promise I will do another beer with Kohle video soon, because I know you like that. Yeah, I will put some links in the descriptions with all the gear used. Also like the microphones, the drums, and the snares, and what else? Yeah, everything I used. I'll put it there. And yeah, get a tune bud. You know, that made my life so much easier. That thing once fell like behind my, you know, this is my my mic shelf, you know, with all the nice microphones I have. You can't see them, but there's like way too many microphones here. Anyway, like it once fell behind that shelf and I couldn't find it. So for one drum session like 2 years ago, I had to tune without a tune bot and I felt totally helpless and naked. It's terrible. So get that little thing. It's brilliant. It really changed my life. Now I'm so much faster when I tune drums. And you know, I know those frequencies I was talking about. I know those frequencies. I know how to tune this tom and that tom because I know their sweet spot. Very powerful. Get that thing. There's also a new version. I haven't checked it out. Maybe it's even cooler. That's all for today. I'm looking forward to reading all your comments and share the video. Share the video on Facebook and elsewhere to make me rich and famous. I see you in hell, motherfuckers. I love you all. Bye-bye.